Back to class. We'll gradually moving towards the end of module 3. In this class, we'll be looking at what the Scrum Master does at the backlog refinement meetings. What the Scrum Master does at the backlog refinement meeting. As a quick background, we would remember what the backlog refinement is. The backlog refinement is also called backlog grooming. So at any time you hear backlog refinement or backlog grooming, we make reference to the same. And we said in module 2 that the backlog refinement meeting is to prepare future sprints. Backlog refinement meeting is on the product backlog. What are we refining the product backlog? But we are refining the product backlog in preparation for future sprints. So most organizations have backlog refinement meetings in their sprint cycle. So to some, let's say for instance, a team does 2 weekly sprints. That means the sprint will be for 2 weeks. In those 2 week cycle, they could have backlog refinement weekly. They may decide to have backlog once in a sprint cycle. They may decide to have backlog 3 times in a sprint cycle. It depends on their need and what they need to achieve. At the early stage where a product is just being developed, a team could decide to have more backlog refinements so that they can quickly prepare future user stories and arranging them into placeholders for future sprints. So that's what the backlog refinement is. If you need a quick catch up, you could go over to module 2 where we discussed the backlog refinement. So let's see what the Scrum Master does in the backlog refinement meeting. Alright, this is basic to all. It facilitates meeting. Remember, the backlog refinement meeting is similar to the sprint planning meeting. In actual sense, is as a pre-sprint planning meeting. We can actually target or view it in that perception. The backlog refinement meeting is as a pre-sprint planning meeting. So everything that happens in the sprint planning could happen in the backlog refinement meeting. Only that in the sprint planning, we are preparing for a sprint we are about to go into. While the backlog refinement, we are preparing user stories in the product backlog for future sprints. So the Scrum Master facilitates that meeting. Of course, again, the product owner, because of the angle of the product. So the product owner takes a lead in that conversation for the backlog refinement because he owns what needs to be developed. But the Scrum Master is still there supporting and facilitating conversations in the meeting. Of course, the Scrum Master ensures that the team understands the product backlog items itself. The team should understand the product backlog items. That means there should be clarity on what needs to be developed. Right? So from the backlog refinement meeting, the developers begin to have clearer understanding on what needs to be developed. Also, the Scrum Master encourages collaboration and leaves room for brainstorming. What happens in most teams, if I borrow a leaf from another framework called extreme programming, the product owner role in extreme programming is called customer. They have development teams or the developers also. So what happens if we borrow a leaf from extreme programming? What happens is that the customer, in this case in Scrum, product owner, comes around and writes what he wants and says, I want this to be developed. So in that backlog refinement meeting, the developers come together with the product owner and they begin to think through, okay, for what you want, what do we need to do? For instance, a owner wants to build a bed in his room. He goes to um, a carpentry workshop and tells them, I want to build a bed. So the carpenters now come together and say, okay, if let's understand what you need to build. And when they understand what he wants, they now begin to have the conversation of how they would achieve building that bed. Oh, we need to get this measurement of wood. It should be this particular type of wood. So it's that brainstorming that begins to create the user stories for development. So the backlog refinement gives room for expanded conversation on what the product owner does. Yes, the product owner writes all those stories, but in the backlog refinement, the developers have clearer understanding of what they need to do. In the last module 2, when we discussed on the backlog refinement, we also discussed the deep criteria. Deep standing for detailed appropriately, emergent, estimated, and prioritized. So the Scrum Master is also guiding the team to ensure that each story complies with the deep criteria. So you are ensuring each of those stories we are preparing as details needed. All the details, it's actually detailed appropriately. You are ensuring that the story is flexible and adaptive enough. It's emergent. You are ensuring that each story has an estimation. So we would see that at the backlog refinement meeting, which you would go through in your practicals also, you could make use of tools like planning poker. The same planning poker we use for sprint planning. All necessary things you need to do to deliver value is what you would go through. So we're ensuring that the deep criteria is followed. Each of those stories is prioritized based on the angle that the product owner wants it. It could be prioritized based on value. It could be prioritized based on what we could deliver first. It could be prioritized based on which one gets to the market first to cause market disruption. It could be prioritized based on different things, right? So the Scrum Master is ensuring that there is that robust conversation in the backlog refinement meeting. It's also monitoring time box and is ensuring that the agenda for the meeting is followed. The agenda is to prepare stories for future sprints. Is to prepare stories for future sprint and is ensuring that is adhered to. Then of course he addresses impediments. He begins to look out for impediments as they are preparing that stories. He's asking the right questions. Do we have capacity to deliver this story? What more do we need? Hope another team is not working on that story. Hope all the resources we need to deliver that story is made available to us. Do we have all the resources to deliver with us? Right? So it's considering all those and guiding the team to ensure that they can actually deliver what they want. And when there are impediments, is also jumping on those impediments. How do we move these impediments before the story sprints? That's why we added considers DOR. DOR stands for definition of ready. I believe by now you clearly understand what definition of ready is. Definition of ready points to a story that is ready to sprint, which means all the resources needed to deliver that particular task is available. Resources including availability, capacity, is not the story meets inverse criteria and all the rest is available for that piece of story. So the Scrum Master is ensuring a balance of all this. That he ensures that all the discussions are documented also. Whatever decisions we are able to make, whatever progress we are able to initiate, we document them also for future reference. Right? And of course, is always promoting continuous improvement. So it's looking out for ways by which the team will begin to improve, will begin to deliver value, will begin to deliver the right value also. So that would be the class for what the Scrum Master does at the backlog refinement meeting. In a nutshell, the Scrum Master is there with the product owner leading the conversation, but the Scrum Master is guiding and supporting both the product owner and the rest of the team to deliver the objective of the backlog refinements, which is preparing stories for future sprints, ensuring that each story meets definition of ready and planning towards that story in sprint cycle. So of course at this meeting also the team could look at the product roadmap and say, okay, when are we to deliver this? How close are we? What do we need to do? What are the stories that we prioritize? How do we prioritize them? How do we deliver the right values at the right time? So that will be all for this class. We'll see again in the next class. Bye now.